Hello everyone, I am the digital avatar of Professor Valeri Chukhlomin. My job today is to represent him and walk you through his slide deck so you can review it, fast forward if you wish, and then come prepared with questions for the live discussion. As always, Professor Chukhlomin is fully responsible for everything I say. He just suspects that on occasion I may say it a little better. Now let me settle into the role and begin with the main point of this presentation. On the surface, this talk grows out of one course that I have now taught over 4 terms, ECON 3006. But the real purpose is larger. What I want to discuss is what it means to move beyond AI literacy. We still have not fully achieved AI literacy in most institutions. We have not achieved it consistently at the institutional level, not consistently among faculty, not consistently among students, and not fully at the level of systems, procedures, and support structures. But enough time has now passed since generative AI entered higher education in a serious way that we can already see a larger pattern. And my argument is this. Without that larger picture, even our attempts to build AI literacy may remain limited. We may keep adding AI here and there, but we still may not know where we are going. So this talk is really about that larger direction. It begins with my teaching, but it is ultimately about curriculum design, progression, and strategy. That broader framing is where I want to begin. Let me say a few words about how this work emerged. I started seriously working with ChatGPT in December 2022, very soon after it appeared. When paid access became available, I moved to that. When more advanced subscription levels appeared, I adopted those as well, because I always wanted access to the strongest model available. Over time, that expanded into active use of multiple tools and ecosystems. And I can say very directly that simply learning in this space requires constant effort. In practice, it takes at least a couple of hours a day just to stay current in a serious way. The visible part of that process begins with conceptual papers. That is how I think through what is happening. That is how I process my learning, how I interpret what others are doing in this space, and how I clarify what all of this may mean for teaching and learning. I often write these papers first for myself to understand where we are going and what can realistically be done. Then, from those conceptual papers, other things emerge. Models, projects, grant ideas, fellowships, course designs, and importantly, textbooks. Because in many of these areas, if you really want to move forward, there is no textbook waiting for you. You have to produce it. I will refer to some of these conceptual papers during the presentation, and I am very open to sharing what I have developed in this space. So this process is the foundation behind everything that follows. Now let me place this in the context of the larger course sequence. Although today I am focusing mainly on one course, this is really part of a broader 4-course pathway. These 4 courses all in the business space, and they are all designed for non-IT professionals. That distinction is important. There are many legitimate AI programs that go deeply into machine learning, deep learning, coding, Python, and other technical areas. That is not what I am discussing here. I am talking about the broader population of business students, really across majors, who will absolutely be using AI in their professional lives, but are not entering highly specialized technical tracks. So this course, ECON 3006, is one part of a sequence. One course I have already taught multiple times, another course I have now taught, one course is nearing deployment, and one more is nearing development. So I am far enough into this process now to begin drawing broader conclusions from it. This is no longer simply a one-course pilot. It is becoming a curricular pathway. Let me now turn to the underlying logic of AI-driven course development. The central design tension is that in an AI-driven course, we are teaching 2 things at once. One is AI, how to use it systematically and professionally. The other is the subject matter itself. And this creates a real tension. If we focus too much on AI, for example, on teaching students how to use ChatGPT, then the course can drift toward IT. It starts becoming a course about the tool itself rather than about the business domain. But if we start only with the subject matter, then AI may appear only in fragments, almost episodically, and students may never develop a systematic understanding of how to work with it. So from the beginning, course developers have to make some important decisions. Do we start with AI, or do we start with the subject matter? Do we use one tool, or do we use multiple tools? If we use one tool, do we rely on a free version, a paid version, or a premium level of access? These are not minor technical details. They shape the level, the structure, and the feasibility of the course itself. The next issue is AI readiness at the campus level. This is still a developing area, and some campuses are much more prepared than others. Some institutions have established enterprise accounts with OpenAI, Google, Claude, or Microsoft Copilot. Some have more than one. Some are experimenting not only with large language models, but with other forms of AI deployment as well. If you are developing a serious AI-driven course, that matters. Faculty readiness matters too. Are you designing the course only for yourself to teach, or is this something that may eventually be taught across multiple sections or by multiple instructors? If so, then the readiness of other faculty becomes part of the design question. Student readiness matters as well, especially in my context, where many students are adult learners who are already working. Some come from organizations that are much more advanced in AI use than others. Some students think they are AI ready because they have used a free version of the tool casually, but that does not necessarily mean they are ready for disciplined academic and professional use. Then there is systems readiness. If students run into problems, if accessibility issues arise, if there are complaints, misunderstandings, or policy questions, are the university systems ready to handle that? Are support offices prepared? Are procedures clear? Are IT instructional design, accessibility, and student support aligned? All of that matters if we are taking AI-driven course development seriously. This leads directly to the question of curriculum positioning. And the practical question is really this: is the curriculum ready for AI deployment, and are the students ready for it? If students are not ready, then a large amount of course time has to be spent on AI literacy, on checking what students know, and on trying to bring everyone to the same page. And that time comes directly out of the subject matter. At the same time, if AI appears only here and there across the curriculum, in one discussion, in one course, and one assignment in another, that does help. It can normalize AI literacy, and faculty who do that are doing important work. Students can learn about hallucinations, verification, privacy, and responsible use. But that is still episodic. It is not the same as systematic development. And if students are taking many courses at once, they may receive fragments of AI literacy in some or even all of them, sometimes repeating the same things, sometimes inconsistently, but without a clear progression. So for institutions where there is not yet a strong coordinated AI strategy, especially in business education for non-IT professionals, I think the practical answer is a parallel curriculum. Traditional courses can continue perhaps with selective AI literacy elements. But in parallel, one can build a more intentional sequence of courses that integrates AI much more deeply and systematically. For me, building that parallel curriculum became the workable transition strategy. And once that problem is clear, the next question becomes the depth of AI development itself. At this point, the next question becomes how deep are we actually going with AI? A basic AI literacy is a very legitimate starting point. In fact, one can take almost any course and infuse it with some foundational elements of AI literacy. That may involve explaining what large language models are, how prompting works, why hallucinations happen, why sources need to be checked, what privacy concerns exist, and so on. But if we are designing a dedicated sequence of AI-driven courses, then a basic AI literacy is not enough. The next level is AI fluency, and that immediately raises another question. What exactly do we mean by AI fluency? How fluent is fluent? Are there degrees of fluency? So here I realize that we need more precise language and more practical definitions. We need a way to describe progression beyond general awareness. That is why I had to move from general AI literacy language toward a more structured framework. This is where I briefly introduce my Emerald model. This model emerged from my own thinking about course design and AI proficiency levels. It is based on capability maturity logic, and the key idea is that people will be using AI inside organizations, and those organizations themselves will have different levels of AI maturity. That means individual proficiency and organizational readiness are connected. Some organizations may already be operating at a more advanced level and expect newcomers to catch up. In other cases, individuals may know much more than the organization is prepared to support. So there can be tension in both directions. I developed this model first in early 2024, before I was aware of how widespread maturity model thinking would soon become in AI. Today, many people use stages or levels to describe AI progression, although with different definitions. That level-based thinking has now become quite common. The practical point here is that when we define where an organization is, whether it is L2 or L3, that depends on a number of key performance areas or KPIs. I originally developed this model with the organization I know best in mind, an institution of online learning for adult students. But the broader point is that each organization has key performance areas, areas that help define where it is on the AI progression. So Emerald became my way of thinking about progression in a more disciplined way. For this presentation, I do not want to go deeply into the full Emerald model, but I do want to explain the practical meaning of the levels. In my classification, L1 means foundational and episodic AI use. So if someone is developing a course and integrating AI here and there, perhaps in one discussion, one assignment, one project, one design exercise, one data analysis task, then in my framework that still belongs to L1. It can involve LLMs, image generation, design models, data tools, and other systems, but the use is still relatively limited and episodic. The next question is what comes after that. In my classification, that is where L2 and L3 become important. L2 is where individuals in the organization begin developing further AI capabilities in a more systematic way. L3 is where those capabilities are no longer mainly individual, but are embedded across the organization as a whole and its systems. So for course design, this becomes very important. When we build a course, we need to know what level we are targeting. Are we designing for L1, for L2, or for something beyond that? The next question then is what exactly students need in order to move from L1 to L2. To address that, I created another framework from my conceptual work, Professional AI Fluency, or PAF. It was inspired in part by Anthropic's discussion of AI fluency, but for business education, I needed something more concrete and more specific. I needed a framework that would actually work for course development. So I reviewed the literature, classified the competencies, and developed a practical framework for business use. What you see on this slide is essentially a roadmap, an AI curriculum for moving from L1 toward L2. Once those capabilities are defined, the course can then be built around them in a much more systematic way. And that is exactly what I did next in ECON 3006. Let me now show how this approach was actually used in ECON 3006. This is a relatively advanced course, but because I work in an institutional setting where I could not assume strong prior AI literacy, I had to include some pre-L to L1 work at the beginning. That took up some course space, but the main goal of the course was really to move students from L1 to L2. For that purpose, I used the PF framework as the organizing spine of the course. Because PF consists of 8 pillars of AI competency, I divided the course into 8 weeks, and each week addressed one pillar. So from the standpoint of the earlier design intention, this means that in this course, I chose to begin with AI. I wanted students to learn how to work systematically with ChatGPT using the most of its functionalities, and that became the spine of the course. Then I had to decide what to do with the subject matter, and here the earlier decision actually gave me the answer. If the AI fluency framework is the spine, then the subject matter needs to be divided into subsequent use cases that illustrate each stage of that AI capability progression. So the subject matter was rebuilt as a sequence of use cases. Students were not just learning AI in the abstract. They were learning AI in relation to practical business problems and using it to investigate, solve, and explain those problems over time. There is also a conceptual paper where I explain this process in much more detail. So the next step in my course development journey was selecting the subject matter and turning it into a series of use cases. One thing I want to stress is that with this kind of approach, subject matter cannot be developed casually. It is a non-trivial design task. Because we are creating a parallel curriculum, we are working in an elective space where we can give students tools for applying both their theoretical knowledge and their AI capability development to practical problems. For this course, I selected a realistic business problem, economic strategies for local firms entering international markets. I designed this before tariffs became such a dominant topic, but of course the course can now also help students think about and track issues like tariffs. The main point here is that I wanted a realistic workplace situation. My students are adult learners. They can easily imagine themselves in a small business in New York State, Perhaps is the only person tasked with investigating internationalization, or perhaps is someone working with a consultant and needing to understand the process. So the issue was not simply whether the students could use AI. The question was how they would use AI in practical terms to learn about the process, understand it, gather information, interpret it, and advise leadership in a high-stakes situation. I also used scenario planning in course development. I created several student personas representing our university's typical student population in the course. And for each persona, I thought through how that student might move through the course and produce strong work for their chosen scenario. That allowed me to show students examples of what good AI-enabled work could look like. And that was very important because this course was project-based from the first day. The textbook itself also became a source file for the course AI Tutor. Students could see examples, work with the material, and eventually use it to evaluate their own work before submitting it. From there, I had to make the pedagogy itself workable. Traditional pre-AI online courses are often writing-intensive, with discussions and assignments built around text production. But in the age of AI, much of that writing can be generated with the help of AI in minutes. So the question becomes, what exactly are we asking students to do in an AI-driven course, and what still makes pedagogical sense? In this course, I designed assessment so that students used AI throughout. In fact, they were expected to use AI at all times. They built artifacts for their chosen scenario and assembled a portfolio of work, but the final step was a live virtual presentation where they had to explain what they had done, how they had used AI, and what the limitations were. So the final presentation became a validation of the work. That, to me, is also much closer to the workplace. People may use AI to produce work, but they still need to plan and guide it, then explain it, defend it, and stand behind it. I also changed the role of lectures and content guides. In a field where major news and model updates arrive weekly, there is limited value in relying on static pre-recorded lectures or notes. In real life, students will be learning continuously from current sources, from forums, from YouTube, from model updates. So from the beginning, I tried to build that into the course. And finally, I reimagined online discussions. I replaced conventional discussions with the interactions with the AI tutor and reflective notes to me, often accompanied by screenshots. Students were graded on their reflection on the work artifacts, not on generic text production. At the same time, they could still learn from their peers by seeing the work others were doing. That combination made the course much more workable in the AI era. Now let me turn to the learning outcomes and what followed from them. On this slide, you see the formal catalog description and learning outcomes for the course. I do not want simply to read what is on the slide, but the important point is that this course formally combines subject matter and AI. Students learn to use generative AI in economic and business analysis, to frame and solve problems, and to do so responsibly. I also added a research layer to this course. It is accompanied by an IRB-approved, interview-based project grounded in transformational learning. There is a separate article explaining that research approach. So this course is not only a teaching innovation, it also became a research setting for understanding what this kind of learning looks like. The next development was the SUNY microcredential. That is important because the microcredential recognizes that students completed structured work, combining subject matter AI use and systematic engagement with ChatGPT. It tells future employers that students made the effort, completed the course, and worked through a specific AI-driven curriculum. But it also makes me think about something deeper. A microcredential can say something about the skills embedded in the curriculum, but it cannot say everything about the student. It does not fully capture what an individual can actually do on the job. In other words, the credential matters, but it does not tell the whole story. Because I insist on seeing every student explain their project, I end up with a kind of knowledge that is not fully represented in transcripts or badges. In older times, one might say the master really knew what the apprentice could do. That kind of tacit knowledge, that deeper evaluation by a human expert, may actually become important again. As mentioned, since 2024, I taught this course 4 times in small groups because I wanted to understand how it actually worked. The first time I taught it, only 1 of 8 students completed everything at the level I expected. The next time, 4 out of 8, then 7, and most recently, 8 out of 9 completers produced work at a strong level. That is a striking progression, and it tells me something important. This is an undergraduate course for adult learners, but some of the work students are now producing is comparable in practical scope and seriousness to final projects I have seen in MBA settings. As someone who has taught MBA final projects for a decade, I can tell that some of the projects produced by students in ECON 3006 were on the same level. I am still trying to understand all the implications of that. Perhaps MBA students still hold more of the deeper theory, and perhaps one project does not tell the whole story. But the broader point is clear. We are in a different era. Students can now produce much more than older course designs assumed. That is why I think AI strategy should not be only course-wise or even certificate-wise. It has to become program-wise or institution-wise. We need to think more holistically about the relationship between theoretical preparation and practical AI-enabled capability of the graduates. I also continue to collect student testimonials and conduct research. The difficulty is that deeper interview-based work takes time, and business students are not always especially eager to participate in long interviews. So the data collection is ongoing. Now, let's move to another course, MRKT 4060. With all the earlier material in mind, the logic here should be easier to see. I wanted to replicate my approach, but this time to shift the subject matter from economic strategy to marketing. Initially, I call it advanced marketing because I did not yet know exactly what the final structure would be. But following the same general design logic, I worked out the subject matter as a sequence of practical use cases. Eventually, the course became centered on marketing planning for a small business, with the final project focused on a 90-day tactical marketing plan and a broader strategy for business growth. This also required a new textbook. In terms of tool selection, I made a deliberate shift. I had already worked extensively with ChatGPT, and this time I moved into the Google ecosystem. At that earlier point, this was a bit of a gamble because I believed Google would catch up quickly with OpenAI, and I am glad it did. So the course systematically teaches students how to use Gemini, Notebook LM, and custom gems. I also needed to adapt my Professional AI Fluency framework to the marketing field and connect it to marketing competencies. That required another conceptual paper. I am now completing the first run of this course, and I am very pleased with the results. Out of 9 students, 7 are producing very interesting and practically sound work. At the same time, just as in the earlier course, I still had to spend some time at the beginning on basic AI literacy, and that inevitably took up some space in the course. Overall, I am now quite confident that the same logic can be used for developing AI-driven courses in other business domains. With that accumulated experience, I decided the next step was a course for everyone in business. That is BUSN 3000 Applied Generative AI for Business Professionals. The idea is to create a common foundation so that all business majors can finalize the development of basic AI literacy in a more systematic way and be prepared for more advanced courses focusing on professional AI fluency. The logic here is the following. Once this new course is in place, the earlier AI-driven courses can be revised. They will not need to devote time to introductory AI literacy and can fully focus on AI fluency in the subject matter areas. In this new course, I am focusing on the emergence of the components of professional AI fluency, systematically addressing them one by one, and organizing the course through use cases. For tools, I decided to use both ChatGPT and the Google ecosystem because students in real life will need to work across platforms. They need to learn how to compare tools and how to switch from one environment to another. Then the next question became, what should be the subject matter for a course serving all business majors? My answer was to focus on essential transferable professional skills. Students may have specialized knowledge in finance, accounting, economics, or marketing, but all of them also need decision-making, communication, critical thinking, presentation skills, and career management skills. That focus on transferable essential skills became the subject matter backbone of the course. So when students are learning multimodal AI capabilities, for example, they simultaneously work on career development materials such as resumes and cover letters, and use AI in a meaningful professional context. I think this will become a very important course in the sequence, and once it is fully in place, it should allow me to revise ECON 3006 and MRKT 4060 in a more focused way. The final course in the sequence is BUSN 4050, the Capstone. But before speaking about it directly, I want to make a broader point. Once this architecture is in place, it does not stop with economics and marketing. I can easily imagine similar courses in finance, human resource management, and other areas built on the same general logic, deep subject matter, carefully selected AI tools, and realistic practical use cases. The Capstone, however, asks a different question. If students move through a sequence like this and develop real AI fluency, what is the logical next step? To me, the answer is that they should enter a simulation of an enterprise where professional AI fluency is already embedded. At that point, we are no longer focused only on the individual use of tools. We are focused on the organization itself, on systems, on strategy, and on how work gets coordinated in a more advanced AI environment. That is why business strategy becomes the natural culminating space. It is where students begin thinking about human AI workforces, about agentic systems, and about what it means to organize future business activity as an AI orchestrator. I am very excited about this course, although it is still in development, so I do not want to say too much beyond that. But conceptually, this is where the sequence is heading. So as we are nearing the end of this presentation, what are the conclusions from this sequence of courses? What have I learned about moving beyond AI literacy in curriculum design and strategy? My first conclusion is that basic AI literacy is necessary, but it is not sufficient. If we want students to work with AI professionally, we need to design for progression into AI fluency. Second, once AI becomes central, subject matter often has to be rebuilt. We cannot simply take an old course and sprinkle AI on top of it. In many cases, we need to redesign the content as a sequence of practical use cases through which students learn both the field and the disciplined use of AI within it. Third, this kind of design requires structure. We need to decide where AI literacy belongs, where AI fluency begins, what level the course is targeting, and how it fits within a broader curriculum. Fourth, if the larger curriculum is not yet AI ready, then a parallel curriculum may be the most realistic transition strategy, especially for non-IT professionals. And additionally, these courses show that AI-driven learning environments need to be designed around realistic, cumulative, workplace-like activity rather than around older academic routines that no longer make as much sense. Those are the main curriculum-level conclusions I would draw. Finally, what do I think this work contributes at a higher level? If I had to summarize the whole project in one sentence, I would say this. The challenge is no longer whether we acknowledge AI in higher education. The challenge is whether we are prepared to redesign curriculum seriously enough to prepare students and educators to work with it well. Thank you.